So the each asset pattern is the one that organizations follow through to create any of the assets in the core asset base. And the organizational context is that in addition to the decision to go for software product lines, the person who is tasked with creating a particular core asset has the requisite knowledge, knows when this thing is expected to be completed by, so there's a schedule and milestones, and they have the necessary specifications of the kinds of asset or assets that they are responsible for building. So your job then is to use the right set of practices to create a member of the core asset base. So that involves the tool support, the process discipline, the work plan, in addition to the practice area that creates the actual asset. The list of practice areas includes, first of all, this PA star, the wildcard here, which is the practice area in question. So PA star is requirements engineering if you're creating a reusable requirements asset. It's building a business case if you are creating a reusable business case. It's market analysis if you are creating a market analysis for an entire product line. So it could be software or non-software assets. This pattern applies to each of the assets in the core asset base. Then, depending on the asset being created, there are questions of what's the appropriate tool support. And the tool support for a reusable set of requirements is going to be different from the tool support for a reusable set of documentation templates, for example. The level of process discipline and technical planning will vary depending on the technical complexity of the asset being created. So the level of documentation and the level of rigor and the level of process discipline associated with these assets that you are creating will vary, and it's up to you to choose the most sensible approach for the asset in question. What does it mean to test the asset? How do you test reusable documentation? It may mean circulating the document for review among the team, as opposed to how do you test a reusable set of requirements. Configuration management. What kind of configuration management support is needed? And what kind of measures can we associate with this asset to gauge its effectiveness in the overall product line approach, and in particular in its use to create actual products? So the dynamic representation of this pattern is at the center we have the practice area creating the asset in question, and then surrounding it we have these supporting practice areas. The tool support, the technical plan, and the milestones for completing the asset, the measures associated with the asset, the process discipline from which we get the so-called attached process, the guidance for how to use that asset, the configuration management, any test-related assets that we can provide to test this asset. And the outcome of this is a tested, baselined asset that's an effective member of your core asset base, and that includes the necessary guidance for how to use that asset. There are a couple of variants of this. There's the one we call each asset apprentice, which means, if I go back to this slide for a moment, that for one or more of these practice areas, there is a need to strengthen your competence or capabilities in those areas before you can take on the job of creating an asset for a product line. So organizations that are starting out in product lines and that are trying to achieve some level of process discipline might want to focus heavily on the process discipline first, particularly if they're at the equivalent of level 0, before taking on a software product line or before creating any of these reusable assets. Similarly, think about doing an assessment of your current set of tools to determine whether or not they are capable of aiding your goal of creating a reusable architecture, for example, or a set of reusable components. So there may be a learning curve associated with getting you to at least a baseline state of competence before you can fully enact this particular pattern. There's also a variant that we call evolve each asset pattern. And this is an area of some current research. In fact, one of our colleagues, a visiting scientist at the SEI, has written a technical report on the evolution of product line core assets. There's also work being done elsewhere in the area of the evolution of software architecture. So as the product line matures, assets will evolve, there'll be new features added, there'll be newer technologies employed. So any organization grappling with those issues is, in effect, enacting the evolve each asset variant of the each asset pattern. So again, this one doesn't get into the funding model or the organizational structure. And this is not concerned with product building. There's another separate pattern for that. So all of these patterns complement each other in the overall product line roadmap, the factory pattern.